it was only until I found my sense of who I was and my authentic life that everything started snowballing in my career, in my life. And I think I am on a trajectory that is far more successful than what my business career ended up being. So I think that in order to get that snowball effect, you really need to find who you are and your inward sense of truth, your inner truth. I really feel like I found home, like in myself and in this career.
I'm Stephen Bradshaw, and this is Snowball Psychology. Lisa F. Chen, and in my head I'm hearing a swear word in the middle there. You're a gangster therapist. I've seen you come up alongside me, and I've had a lot of respect for your path, and we share a lot of commonalities as well. We both worked in finance. You were at Goldman, right?
I was at Morgan Stanley and then Deutsche Bank as a trader. So I did both investment banking and then was a trader in arbitrage.
Great. You cut your teeth in Wall Street, worked in a bunch of startups, and did a lot of intense work. And then you shifted into this realm of clinical work, became a therapist, as did I. And I'm curious about that transition. I'm curious, this whole podcast is about how good things start small and that a snowball builds. And I'm interested where your current career path started. What was the moment where you thought, I can be a therapist, and committed to this?
Okay. Well, there's a lot to answer, a lot to say about each of those things, but I'll try to keep it brief in a way. I really enjoyed my business career, and it was one of those things where I would say a short answer to how I ended up becoming a therapist is that I really wasn't living my authentic life fully in business. And it's to say that I was doing really well and I was getting promoted and I was moving up the career ladder and having a lot of people managing, really having a pretty sexy career from a professional perspective. But as I climbed the ladder, I was searching for some internal satisfaction, some internal fulfillment. And as I kept going up the ladder, I became sort of more unhappy with the state of my life. And it was out of really simply desperation that I started turning to therapists, mental health support. And I would say that it was happening since my 20s, so it's been with me for a really long time. And it wasn't until a real magical experience with a psychoanalyst, maybe 9 years ago, that helped me transform the way that I was looking in the world, the way that I was looking at my life, and to be able to shed all of my defenses and the reasons why I was not living sort of what I call authentic life. And as I shed those layers away, all I had left was just, I want to really help people. And that's why I came into this career.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I want to zoom in right to that moment where something magical happened. If you slow down and remember what exactly it was that helped you to make that shift.
It was just over time and it was a happenstance. I would say there wasn't any one moment. I think, it was just like an aha moment, which I still can't really quite explain, Steve. I don't really know if I have a moment in time. I had been really discovering things about myself, but not really quite conscious about it, but noticing that I was really much happier, able to stay and do things that were consistent, and receiving a lot of joy in my life, where in the past, some of my closest friends knew that I was struggling with severe depression, but a lot of my colleagues didn't. And so this depression just lifted, and it was sort of a parting of the waves. I was working at a startup that just had imploded, and I was, sitting on the beach, as we say in business or consulting, and it just came into my mind to apply to school, and thought this could be something I would really enjoy, especially because this is not just a career that can be fulfilling personally, but it's something that I can carry through the rest of my life. And I applied. It was fairly easy. The process was fairly easy. And then within a couple months, I was going to graduate school.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Was the psychoanalyst a different kind of person to anyone else up to that point?
You mean,
was there something in the person themselves?
Yeah. I mean, I did see, several psychologists, therapists before, and I hadn't really known the different modalities. Looking back, they were CBT or DBT or ACT driven. And I'd say the reason why the psychoanalyst really, it was 8 or 9 years of really being in the grind of the minutia of my life. So I would say it wasn't until like 4 years that things started really changing. It was like there was like roots growing, and you wouldn't see from the top you wouldn't necessarily see the change until like 4 years later. And that type of patience, meeting with me 3 or 4 times a day with the type of struggles that I was dealing with and maybe repeating the same things. The difference with the psychoanalyst is that she had incredible patience and unconditional love in the way that she allowed me this incredible space, which she didn't interfere with giving me any affirmations, any, judgments. It was just this open space to be with my emotions and feelings and my thoughts, and this innate confidence that I would get through it that was really quiet. And so, in psychoanalysis, it's a lot about sort of redirecting and being with myself, and I think that's why it was so different with her. She provided a steadiness, really my first experience, I would say, of a secure attachment, and that consistency and that steadiness really has helped me tremendously and given me a chance to sort of go inwards.
If I met you halfway through that course of therapy, would you have known it was going to end up well and that your life was heading in this direction, or was that mysterious to you?
It was mysterious to me. I was really frustrated and, trudging in the dark, not knowing what the point of, my psychoanalytical work was doing or helping. There are a lot of times when I just really wanted to quit. But, if you even met me halfway through versus now, you would see a completely different person before your eyes. So
what
now,
would I see? Yeah.
You would see.
Tell me the difference.
You would have seen a person that didn't have depth, that was in a lot of pain and trauma, and really was surviving one small crisis to the next, and really not having a lot of insight into the emotional pain, but not much insight about what was causing it.
So lots of the newer therapies promise very quick cures. Mm. And I'm curious if that could have been done any quicker, if it needed that time. And do you feel that this quick promise of relief is often overstated? Yeah,
I'm so glad you asked that question. I do think long-term therapy and consistent contact with somebody like a psychoanalyst or a therapist or a psychologist is really necessary, and that for real change, and which is completely contradictory to a lot of modalities and what's being talked about in this world today. I think everyone wants a quick fix, and certainly I did when I was in a lot of pain and struggling. But really, I think it's in the work. It's in the day after day, long-term work that you can reap significant benefits. And I think in some ways, this was my experience for me. And certainly if there are some people that come in that want to work on a small little chunk of their life, they can probably get some benefit out of it, but it wouldn't be necessarily all the extraordinary benefits of what really good, deep therapeutic work can do and offer. I wish everyone would take the time to get to know themselves, because this is the life we're leading, is with ourselves. Yeah.
So if someone's halfway through and they are in that stuck place, and this is quite a common experience for both of us, where they might say things like, I'm broken, or this can't get better, or I just know this is how it is, how I am. I'll never, it'll never change. What do you reach for? What is handy in that type of moment?
I think it's the steadiness and validating their pain and their impatience. And, they might touch parts of me that are impatient, and there might be a part of me that's like, you're right, maybe we should throw in the towel. But I find the steadiness of understanding and reflecting their frustration of their struggle, to stay in the struggle is the best thing that I can offer, and what I've offered to a lot of my clients. When I have, I've worked with a lot of different clients with significant trauma and significant sort of dark places in their life. And when I've offered a hand up, it's never really quite worked. They're looking to be reinforced that they can do it, that they can survive their frustration, patience, and their struggle. They can work through their impatience. There's something to be said about the impatience.
Yeah, so you don't give them a hand. You provide the safe space and give them time to find it themselves. Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, of course, it depends on the acuity, the severity of what my client is coming into. If I work with a lot of, my range of clients go from very acute clients that are in treatment centers and or significant personality disorders or schizophrenia, to high functioning. And so for the higher functioning adults and people that I see, I would really want to reinforce to be in that struggle and to offer space. But if there are clients on the other side where they have, they've been suicidal, there might be some floors in which I might help set for them, if that makes sense.
Since you name that wide range, it got me curious. Are there people that can't be helped? Can everyone benefit?
I think that everyone can benefit from therapy. I know that classically people say, like, narcissists have a hard time being seen and doing the work, but and that type of work is slow. In fact, I know a colleague, a psychoanalyst, that is working with a narcissist client, and even though it's slow, and there is some progress, so I think that everyone can be really helped.
Yeah, so when people drop out, are they just giving up too soon, that if they gave it more time, something might happen?
I think so. I think it goes back to your point, Steve, about the pressure or the cultural phenomenon or the expectation that therapy is an instant fix. And if a person isn't fixed within 3 months or 6 months, then therapy just doesn't work, or it's not working. But I think it's really premature. Yeah, there's just so many factors, I would say, for why people kind of drop out. And I guess I would really encourage a lot of my clients to stay in long term. And a lot of them have. So I don't know if I'm really answering the question, but
yeah, so you take a positive, optimistic stance that you can get to health from any starting point?
Yeah, I do. I do believe that. Yeah.
How many people do you think are living fulfilling lives? Do you think it's the norm? Do you think it's scarce?
Well, I think there is this movement and this trend to sort of think about fulfillment and slowing down, and taking a look towards inwards. But I suppose it's what population you're taking a look at. So, for example, you and I and some of our friends and colleagues are, I would say, working towards a fulfilling life, and really understand what fulfillment is for each one of us. But I would say for the most part, people haven't been sort of like the light bulb hasn't been turned on. I would say they haven't woken up to the idea that of what true fulfillment is. And I suppose it just depends on what other people think. But for me, fulfillment is like more not measured in external means like achievements or the status of a house or vacation, or titles. I think it's more of the sense of fulfillment that when I'm in my deathbed, that I will have said, look back and said, I have lived a really good life. So.
So the light bulb is something to do with the way you experience what's happening, not necessarily what's happening.
Yeah, I think so. I think if you know what the way you experience what's happening and having a sense of what you know matters, you could probably pursue the things that might make your life more fulfilling. I don't know. What do you think? Can I turn that question on you?
Yes. Yeah. I think the massive men lead lives of quiet desperation. And as Carl Jung said, individuation is quite a rare achievement.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think most people are living on a version of the script that's had some minor updates that they were handed, but that is still not really serving them.
Yeah.
And it's hard work to shift that. And often you have to take major setbacks to move on to that path.
Yeah.
And people are not willing. I think there's immunity to change. They're committed to status, to wealth, and to really get into alignment with yourself. I think often there's a hard decision to make. When you moved into becoming a therapist, I'm sure there was some financial setback.
Yeah, right? Yeah. I mean, from that perspective, I think if my quiet desperation hadn't become so evident to me and painful, I don't know if I would have walked on the path to individuation. I feel like my life I feel fortunate and also almost, I would say, forced or compelled to go this path because I had been pursuing that script that you talked about, and I was not getting that inner sense of fulfillment or joy, and kept thinking something was wrong. And so I do agree with a lot of things that you said. I think that the path to differentiation and individuation is hard, and it requires sort of this introspection and self-examination that is also time-consuming. It might be easier just to turn on the TV and kind of numb yourself out in movies or books and media, and rather than turning the spotlight inside yourself. I like what you said.
Yeah, TV is something that's syntonic or aligned with our culture, but is really quite a toxic force, I feel.
Yeah.
It's too passive.
Mm-hmm.
It's not developing you. And I think it's even more passive than reading. Reading, I think you co-create the world with your imagination.
Right.
And so it's a drug that I see it as a drug, like Terence McKenna.
Yeah.
It's the drug that's the most socially acceptable, and people are consuming in large quantities.
Yeah, like TV, social media. I have some clients that are consumed and addicted to TikTok right now. I for one, am very careful with TV. I especially after working so hard and so deeply with so many clients most of the day, I'm really aware of how my emotions get manipulated by TV. And at the end of the day, I don't want to be manipulated with a script that's on TV that's not even real life. So I rarely watch TV these days.
And knowing about the unconscious, you're filling up on all of these images and stories and biases and messages that
That's
are coming
right.
with interests.
That's right.
And then that becomes your thinking down the road.
That's right. Well, that's brilliant, Steve. That's so true. Do you watch TV?
In moderation, little bits,
Yeah.
to stay in touch.
Stay in touch. What about you and social media?
Yeah, I actually removed myself off social media maybe 5 months ago, and the cravings have come down. I hardly think about it now.
Oh, that's
And
wonderful.
I can't say I'm missing much.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think direct experience is what really matters.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. It's so...
How about you? Yeah. How's
How
your
about me?
social media?
Social media. My social media. So I'm like a quiet social media consumer. I am embarrassed to say that I'm always on Facebook, but it's actually to get information. It's more like networking, like therapists, like learning about how other therapists are treating their businesses or working with clients. Instagram, I'm out on it, just sort of catching up with other people or the people that I follow, but I rarely post. And TikTok, I'm really trying to understand that beast, but for the most part, I feel so grateful because the algorithm hasn't caught on to my interest. So I think it's because they know so little of me that TikTok has so little meaning for me. So yeah, there's so many traps as we're talking about it that can divert us from this path of individuation or differentiation. It's almost like junk food. Like I love my potato chips, but it's all like, you can't have too many potato chips. You know what I'm saying?
It gives you what your brain is trained to go after without delivering the substance or the nutrition.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah.
I'm curious about the range of clients that you named there, from schizophrenic to high functioning.
Uh-huh.
And I heard a quote, you should assume that people who claim to be happy are less happy than they claim, and people who claim to be unhappy are less unhappy than they claim. Everyone's closer to the norm than we realize.
Oh.
And some of it is kind of how the view that you're taking on your own life in some ways.
Mm.
And I wondered, are high-functioning people as high-functioning as they seem on the outside, since you get a view that most people don't?
No, I mean, I think a lot of people who are high functioning often have unresolved trauma and maybe look like sort of some version of me, very highly successful, it's super intelligent. Not to say that I'm those values, but the high functioning people are.
I'll give you that.
Like just really, they're so intelligent and. They have the resources to come to therapy week after week, but it's almost an existential unhappiness. They're flying almost too close to the sun, and they're not feeling happy at all. I think in many ways.
What's making them miserable?
It's like the typical stories that feel like. True. Like, despite all the money or external achievement, they're still having problems in their marriage, or they become workaholics and their relationships are suffering with their children. Or even just that story of, I've been able to buy my mansion in Manhattan Beach and build it, and yet at the same time, my personal life is falling apart, or it didn't translate into this happiness that I expected. This long-term happiness. I think isn't there some study, Steve, about like how long, if you end up buying something, how many days it actually makes you happy before you start wanting something else? Like I forgot what the days are, but it's very short-lived.
Yeah. I've seen things like that, hedonic adaptation.
Yes.
So we adjust to what we have.
Yeah. Some of my most high-functioning and I'd say privileged clients are really the most unhappy.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think in one sense that it's the success of an early adaptation, that they probably had some trauma in their family? Maybe it wasn't narrativized, but maybe their mother was just anxious or working a lot. Mm-hmm. Something was there. And they decided, I'm going to work really hard to succeed, to get out of this, to get set up in a way that doesn't look like my family.
Right.
And then they bet everything on that, and they go all the way, and they really succeed.
Right.
But then they've invested all their efforts into a very narrow area, and there are lots of other things that haven't been attended to, maybe relationships, for instance.
Right. I like what you're saying. Yeah, I would say that that's true. I mean, I don't think that the myth of having it all is not quite true. I mean, it's just a myth. And if you spend all your time focusing on your career and achieving that external, like that achievement, the other areas, I mean, frankly, suffer. You know, maybe your health, relationships, and so it's not like I think it's a zero-sum game. You know, we have 24 hours a day. How many days are you focusing on your career versus your family, your own self-development, your own health? And often I find a lot of business professionals, and I would say highly successful business professionals, have something unresolved, and they're using business as a means to, there's a belief that being really successful in business is a way to heal. And once they kind of get close to that point, they still have those inner wounds, you know? So it's like what you said, an anxious mom, you know, and so a client could be achieving success to create a better environment, or you know, a client dealing with growing up with poverty and, you know, using that as a drive to never feel the sense of starvation. But even that sense of wealth and abundance doesn't take away from that neglect, or the scarcity of resources in the child. In fact, you know, so there's like some emotional health wounds that have to be really addressed. It's interesting though, because I have, you know, it's not to say that all business professionals are really unhappy. I just say that there's, you know, I think when I've seen some senior executives, they're still dealing with anxiety, stress, burnout, depression, maybe a loss of meaning in their lives because they thought this was the meaning of their life, you know. So they all come in shapes and forms.
I think that's so interesting what you said, that business people are using achievement to heal themselves in some sense.
Yeah.
Make themselves whole.
Yeah.
And so then they're trying to solve something with a solution that isn't designed to do that.
Right.
It's just not going to work.
Right. It's that, you know, that phrase, and I love this, that concept of external locus of control versus internal locus. Like we're trying to control our inward feelings by managing externally what's going on. So we're so externally focused on achievements, work, wealth, as a way to fix something that's going on with us inwards. And so, you know, I do see a lot of really, frankly, highly functioning, very successful people, you know, stuck with that problem and having a very limited access to, unless they've done tremendous therapy, you know, a lot of internal work, really not even spending much time emotionally, like inwards, and really understanding what makes them tick. Yeah.
Interesting.
I'm so curious about your experience because I know you work with a lot of business professionals too. Does any of this resonate with you?
Yes, it reminds me of Tolstoy's quote, all happy families are the same and every unhappy family is unique. Business people tend to have a similar psychology, I've found, at the higher levels, that, you know, and maybe it's similar even to top sports people. I've noticed some similarities there.
Yeah.
So they there's a one-dimensionality about them, and they're craving depth, but they've never found access to it.
Yeah, that's and it's so interesting that you say that, because I really like my highly functioning people in business, but it's like I find them sort of more set back and understanding that their depth is more, one-dimensional, as opposed to my schizophrenic, clients. They're so much where they're multidimensional. They have to deal with all sorts of different types of feelings. So
yes, it's reminding me of Freud's comment that depressed people see the world more as it is than people who may appear healthy, but they are living in delusion to some extent. But the schizophrenic may be in touch with more reality, more internal psychic reality.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting working with the different. I mean, I think when I first came into this profession, I thought immediately, it makes a lot of sense for me to work with highly functioning people, especially from business, given my background. And it'd be so fulfilling and joy. And it's taking me a sense of like readjustment in a way. I do really still like working with them. But I was very much like them, 10 or 15 years ago, where I just was really externally focused. And it took me quite a bit to understand the depth to explore and develop my sense of self. And that's what I have to remind myself, because I was actually surprised. I'm like, why aren't these people like me? Like, where's their depth of understanding and the depth of emotions? And then I had to take a step back and realize it's taken me quite years of hard work to get to where I'm at. So
interesting.
Yeah.
So you are quite unique in that way. You're very successful and you take care of business, and you're probably the hardest working therapist I know of in LA.
Aside from you.
Yeah, maybe we compete.
We compete.
And then you're also a kind, sincere person with a rich inner life who's really nourished and developed that inner life. And I think often there's a dichotomy. Sometimes it appears as money on the one side or meaning on the other side. And society tends to push you into one of those poles.
Right.
And it's very hard in society to be successful and tend to your inner life, I feel.
Yeah.
And then I have on the other side, I work with a lot of creative people who have incredibly rich inner lives and haven't put points on the board, haven't moved their careers forward, struggle in terms of the outer life.
Why do you think that is? I'm so interested, because I don't work with a lot of creatives. Why is that the case?
I think if you really do follow that inside out approach, where you honor what's on the inside and you build off of it, it takes a lot of time to develop, and it's very complex, and you can get lost along the way, and it can be hard to build an actual crystallized life structure, especially if there's some patterns embedded in how you operate, such as dissociation and using substance and developing a really rich inner world that is a little bit separate to reality, that isn't very well integrated and grounded. Often I've noticed creative people had a period of sickness when they were young. They were bedbound for a while, or they were withdrawn for some reason, and an inner life was given a chance to develop.
Wow. Yeah.
And so then those people with the inner life, I think when we can help them develop into the world and succeed, the world becomes much richer. So I think there are two categories that I'd notice a lot. I have a tagline actually for this.
What's that?
Helping the successful be soulful and the soulful be successful.
Oh, I like that. You are so good with words. That's a good one. So
yeah, I think there's work in each of them is working at what they are lacking in.
Do you think that hardship drives a reason for soulfulness?
Yes, where the mental break becomes a mental breakthrough. I think that often you have to, in AA they say you have to hit rock bottom, right?
Yeah.
I think a certain level of loss and pain forces you to come to terms with aspects of yourself that need to be included.
Yeah. It's sort of interesting because when we talk about professionals and, executives, undoubtedly they've gone through some type of failure, a business failure. And I wonder, what becomes the lightning rod for them to develop a sense of soulfulness or introspection.
Yeah, what do you see? I mean, I'm assuming they're coming to you looking for that, but not knowing the words.
Yeah, I mean, well, a lot of there's a couple of people that way, and it's usually just actually I have a young professional that is doing this, and she has done really well, and she just sort of got more and more depressed, and so it's been a question of slowing down and turning inwards. I suppose I haven't cracked this formula yet because, I'd like to sort of group all these business professionals, but when I think about it, they're all in different states, like there are some business professionals that have done a lot of therapy, and there are some business professionals that don't have any sort of insight about themselves. I think it's like a lot of the business professionals that come originally for me is not about like finding a deeper sense of meaning. They're coming because they're getting stressed, burnt out, or depressed, and they don't necessarily know why. So it's a longer journey.
I think you can attain. There's a book called "What Got You Here Won't Take You There" by Malcolm Goldsmith, and I think you can get early success by ignoring depth, ignoring aspects of yourself,
right,
and being very strategic and maybe even Machiavellian to some extent. And then that eventually starts to burn out, and you're not feeding the deeper parts of yourself, and you run out of energy, or you get a health problem, something breaks down. And there's an allure to doing that. I think a lot of business people, like Steve Jobs, by being almost anti-psychological in a sense, they were able to cut through and create a success. And then I think there's a lot of people mimicking that. And I actually have a creative client. I won't mention what field, and he expresses being an entertainer, not a artist, and that he intentionally doesn't let himself get too high on his own supply or in love with his own work. He stays very professional, and that allows him to succeed where other artists or people calling themselves artists get they lose the connection with the audience, they lose product market fit, they get their inner life takes them in other directions, and it takes too long to integrate everything that they unfold. And so you can take that quick path to success,
right?
But then I think it's inevitable that it breaks down.
Right. I think that's true. I'm just thinking as you were talking about it, and then I have a follow-up question for you. I get updates from my business school classmates and our magazines or email updates. And there are so many stories, at my age now where people have become really successful or retired when they were 40, or, in different areas. They've climbed to really the tops of their careers. And there are more stories of, I really wish I had spent time with my kids. I really wished my health is now in poor state, and it's almost like they were so externally focused and gave no chance for this internal reflection of like, what are my sort of softer values softer goals that I want in my life. And they're sort of reaching at the end of the game and looking back and saying, oh, geez, I might have played this game wrong, and so my question to you is, though, like, we're talking about this inward focus of the creatives versus maybe the external focus of some of these high achievers, and where do you think the mix is between the two? What do you think is a good balance? Or is that
I see them
possible?
as-
Is that possible to achieve?
It's hard to get everything in one place with humans and with careers. And for myself, I want to balance caseload where I have both. And I think you've come to a similar point listening to you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think even with humans, I think it's nice to I have my flaky artistic friends and my solid, less creative friends.
Yeah.
And they balance.
Oh, that's true. That's interesting. Yeah. So you create the balance. You're intentional about the balance.
It's probably more unconscious than
Yeah.
conscious.
Yeah.
And we live a little bit out of balance
Mm.
in the stage of our career.
Yeah.
We're both, quite engaged in the process of setting up and, seeing a lot of clients.
Yeah. That's true.
So and I actually think that's part of a trend where there's less investment in social community.
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely true.
I think we're at a point in civilization where it's got really desperate. It's really hard out there.
To
And
develop.
people are in survival mode a lot of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no time for social community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And often it's social community starts to get tied to things where there's money exchange.
Yeah.
It's hard to just do things for purely social reasons.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, we're often involved in trainings where we get
Yeah.
the social aspect and you get given a certificate at the end that helps your career.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if other countries are doing it better. I know
I think Europe
Europe does it.
Europe is the place to live for lifestyle, and America is the place to make the money. And at some point I would love to incorporate Europe more into my life.
Yeah.
I think they really get living in Europe.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think? And I'm curious about Asian countries as well.
Oh, geez. I definitely think there's we're definitely part of a rat race here in America. It's like bigger is always better, more is better. Like health and wellness. The healthier you are, if you're vegan, if you're gluten free, it's like more is more, right? And how about a balance? How about some balance into our life? So I don't feel like our culture allows for sort of balance in our life as much. In Asian cultures, I think there is an equal sense of, and I'm only speaking of Taiwanese and Chinese cultures because it's my culture, but there is a sense of really hard work. There's almost even this lack of intense inward focus too. I think it's getting better, mental health and introspection is really important over time, but there is incredible pressure, I think, in Asia to do well.
Interesting. What are the side effects of that?
Well, I think disconnection, like, what you had said, stress, burnout, depression. I'd say failed marriages, strained relationships with children. And I even see this in my work in Los Angeles. Parents have done really well, but somehow wasn't really perfectly attuned for their child. And now their child is actually growing up with a lot of problems, So I think this idea of working really hard without being able to sacrifice, working hard without having any negative consequences is not true. I think people believe it, but there are always consequences for our actions that we take.
And so we're all in a bind around this.
Yeah, yeah. I find myself in a bind. I don't know how you feel about it, but like you said, we are setting up our practice, and I think I've told you and shared that I actually have a problem like declining work, and I find traits of workaholism that came from my corporate life feeding into my life as a clinician. And really when I'm spending all this time with my clients, really being with them, where is how am I dedicating time to my inward sense of self, like what's, the inward exploration. Not that I don't experience and grow with my clients, if I let my clients touch me in the way that I want them to, but where's my time? Where's my time?
That's interesting. I'd like to explore the aspect where, to me, it feels almost, I would say every single client is working one of my edges in some way, that I'm listening to them speak almost like I'm listening to a voice in my own head that's familiar. And as they make progress, it feeds back to me. My own psyche is updating.
Yeah.
Do you feel that?
Yeah, I definitely do. But my schedule today, my schedule as it is today, like I think I was talking to you about it, like I'm working 6 days a week and having one day, today's my day off. And it's such a treasure and luxury for me to go to hot yoga for an hour and a half. And I'd like to have more of those times for myself. And it's probably driven by self-care, but a chance to just be with myself and all my parts. But you're right. I do really learn a lot from my clients, especially in couples. And a lot of my clients, some of them really, when they're growing, I sort of grow with them. So it really is such a pleasure to work with them because I feel like I'm growing myself. I think it's more the conscientious or intentional effort, the time that the quiet space that I so often ask my clients to have is something that is really just not as easy for me, given perhaps the stage that we're in.
Yes, so I do think that negative space helps to nourish the positive work, when you are with a client.
Yeah.
So I relate to that. But I also wonder, one of my questions for you was, what helps you to see more clients than most therapists? And I was wondering if you work in a way that is closer to home or is less effortful, or that you are using your energy in a way that allows for seeing many people. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's a really complicated question. Like I have a complicated answer, but I would say nearly, you're right, I do see probably, well, both of us see, someone asks you the same question, both of us see quite a bit of clients more than the average. And, and I do believe that I'm able to stay present with every client and they generally stay with me over time. I think that my ability to be with the clients is a direct result of my psychoanalytic work. I have such awareness of my internal state of being and the ability to know when there's noise in my head, to know how to clear it. And maybe that is also in conjunction with my meditation and my yoga practice. I'm really constantly really listening with a sense of depth and understanding. So I would say that is like the foundation of how I can see so many clients. And then some of it is like practically somatic, really, I really subscribe to do the work that we're doing and the amount of clients that I see on a weekly basis. I really have to be diligent and disciplined about my time, meaning, and my self-care. So I'm really eating nutritious meals. I'm not, maybe one day a week I'm having pizza, but it's all like very much enriched with vegetables, salads, salmon, very rare potato chips, and so I'm really conscious about my nutrition, what I'm drinking. And then really the foundation for my work is, some type of exercise. Like I really have to do something to help me keep my body primed for the work that we do. Even though we're sitting, it requires so much energy. So
The way you describe it, I'm getting the sense of a psychological athlete.
I agree.
That pays attention to all the energy leaks.
It is. And I'm like, I have a routine and a ritual. And unfortunately, some of the prices I paid is like I'm very disciplined in even seeing my friends during the week. I know that even if I might be free from like 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock, I'm really not, I'm choosing to spend that time to decompress and be with my thoughts, and not watching TV, as we talked about, not watching social media, just kind of being with myself and being with the silence. Almost every day I take a bath, with magnesium and lavender. And so it is true. It's almost like this psychological athlete that in order to be there for my clients in the best possible way, because I don't know, like, this, we don't know what we face when we walk into that session. We don't know if we're faced with something, a client's doing well or a client is dealing with a crisis, and we just have to be prepared for everything. So, so I think it's like, I do believe that my personal therapy actually makes me a really good clinician. And then, and the way that I sort of conduct my life outside to prepare for the work we do is what helps me. And I suppose that I've developed a lot of different tools in my toolbox. I have had, you and I love trainings. And so the benefit of it is sometimes it might be, an approach that internal family systems makes more sense, or EMDR makes more sense. There are different couples, approaches and modalities that I might use and have that in my back pocket. So I think all these sorts of things make me versatile, but I think there's a sense of like to manage the caseload that I do have, it's almost like resilience, like, and how do you prepare for it? How do you do it?
Yeah. So I relate to a lot of that. I think I've cut a lot of indulgences.
Yeah.
And I do identify as an athlete in many ways.
Yeah.
I noticed this when I was an athlete as a rock climber.
Yeah.
Your life becomes kind of narrower and narrower as you get better.
Yeah.
And I start to realize, I'm just going to these 3 places. I'm rotating around a very small little circle.
It's so true, right? It's so true. It's almost like, my aperture has narrowed, and I feel like I'm leading a seclusive life in many ways. For my work.
Yeah.
It's a conscious decision for me, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's because in this work you are accessing the stream of life. This very rich stream of nutrients is coming through your office.
Yeah.
Almost like we have our feet in the stream. Other people live in the village a little further back.
Yeah.
And because that's so rich, then you can make sacrifices in other areas because you're getting fed by that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I like that. I like that metaphor. What is your schedule like? What do you think helps you with your... Are you scheduling exercise in, or quiet negative space for you? How are you managing your schedule? I'm really curious.
Yeah, so I started to skip on exercise and focus more on yin type activities like sound baths, doing a lot of neurofeedback, which we can talk about.
Yeah.
And meditation and qigong. And my acupuncturist said to me, you should exercise. Your body's you're not moving enough qi with what you're doing. And I started to realize our job, we are at risk of becoming quite sedentary and, underdeveloped physically.
Yeah.
And so now I've picked climbing back up in the last couple of weeks.
Oh, that's
and
good.
I can feel my energy is better. It's good.
Yeah. That's really good. That's good to know. I feel like if exercise is not a component of what we do, I think it's really hard to be fully present and recharge. I've been reading that, I'm going to screw up her name, but she's the author of Burnout. I just finished reading Burnout, which is a great book. And she had a concept of completing the stress cycle. And in that every day, like back in the days, when there were lions and we were cavemen, if a lion came up to us and then was shot or died, we would have the stress of it, but there'd be a natural sort of curve, an ending, a reconciliation of completion of the stress cycle. Maybe we'd share it with friends. or family. But in this day, we're living the sense of chronic stress. And so her theory is that you need to complete the stress cycle every day. And her suggestion is through somatic work, either some type of exercise, breathing, a body scan, and that we should be diligent about it because we are not confronted with life or death decisions, but our brain doesn't know it. And so the completion of, we need to think about completing the stress cycle every day in order to rid ourselves of that chronic stress. So I really embrace that fact. Yeah.
Yeah,
Do you?
I found exercising and then meditating and feeling my nervous system shift.
Yeah.
That's a good combination, I've noticed.
I should try that. Yeah. I love that.
Picking up on something you said earlier, it's interesting how we don't know what's coming at us every session.
Right.
And there are big surprises, right?
Yeah.
Often you expect it to be something and it's not at all.
Right.
And so I'm just reflecting on that, and maybe that's why self-care is needed, to have the level of energy and presence to confront that much uncertainty hour after hour after hour.
Right. Yeah.
But there's a big burden in that, and it's, unless you actually do it, you don't appreciate just how, we're never on stable ground. We're always confronting newness continually. And
right.
It's a lot to learn to accustom to.
Right. It's that sense of agility too, having to be agile and fluid with what comes your way. I find if I'd gone out the night before or stayed up late, I'm not as nearly prepared to see the tectonic plates shifting, in the course of the day with my clients. So, yeah.
That's interesting the way you said that. When I did a trip and I made a little video of it some years ago, and when I was editing myself, I noticed myself in conversation missing cues. Someone would say something and I would still be responding to the previous thing they said.
Yeah.
Or I would be missing that their facial expressions changed.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know it at the time. It was only in looking at the footage that I realized that.
Right.
And then it makes me wonder, how much does that still happen? How much am I missing?
Yeah. It's so interesting from that perspective. Yeah. as attuned as good a therapist, I think you and I are, I bet we miss out on a lot still, just the cues, just in the normal. It's just probably, that is what it is to be human, I suppose,
Do you think clients are broadcasting one thing? I've heard this called the manifest content versus the latent content. They think the session is about one thing, but then there's a deeper communication.
Yeah.
And they're hoping you're going to pick up on that, even though they don't know what it is themselves.
Yeah. Well, that would be psychoanalytic or depth focused, right?
Yeah, or using your IFS. I know you are pretty far along with IFS. So the thinking about other parts that may be communicating below the dominant part.
Yeah, that's true. That's definitely true. I think, just kind of going back to what you were saying earlier, if we're not fully present, we might just see the protective parts or the dominant parts and not really notice that there might be a deeper sort of a hidden part still at play and wanting some attention or communication.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, an EMDR facilitator once said to me, I asked the question, the client's not accessing any emotion, even when they tell the story about this bad thing that happened, it stays very surface level. And she said, ask him to say it again much slower. And we did that, and the emotion just appeared. It was quite remarkable, just by slowing down.
Wow.
Nothing more.
Wow. Yeah. I have to incorporate that. That's a great suggestion.
Yeah, or maybe even do that again the next time, or interrupting the normal flow of conversation. I think we don't maybe take enough liberties as therapists to interrupt social convention.
Yeah. I totally agree with you on that. Yeah.
Switching gears, what is your favorite moment in therapy or type of client situation, or what is very enlivening for you?
That's so hard to say, because it's like, talking about internal family system, there's so many parts that get nourished by different types of clients. So I don't know if there's a certain type of, was it your question, a certain type of client, or what just gets
And
me
just
excited?
thinking about the work, where's the spark? Where do you come alive?
Well, this is probably a difficult, embarrassing thing to admit, but I really like working with people that are their defenses are already down, and they're in the thick of their exiles or their vulnerability. There must be some bias that I have towards that, but I think we can do some really beautiful work when some of the defenses are down. And so, clients that I've worked with for a really long time, that feels really nourishing and kind of exciting, because I have the history and my concept of conceptualization of who they are and their psyche is so rich, because I've had all these interactions, and so I can really relate to them on a deeper level. So I would say long-term clients really are nourishing to me, and clients that are really dealing with trauma or depression or really severe sort of manifestations of mental health problems, they can be the most challenging and yet the most fulfilling types of work for me. I can't necessarily do it all the time. Like when I think about my full caseload, if I were to fill the caseload with all those types of clients that might be coming from the treatment center or schizophrenia, that would be a lot for me to deal with. But I really find a sense of joy in working with them, partly because I sort of understand what pain they've been to. I can relate to where they are, given my own personal experience, and I want to provide that steadiness and that space and that hope, that the quiet hope, when they show up every day, that there is another way out. So I'd say those are the two areas that really bring me joy.
I appreciate your answer, that almost like fine wines that get better, your clients mature and the work gets richer over time.
Yeah. I mean, I think that long-term therapy really gets me. I feel like there's a lot of meaning and a lot of transformation that can happen. The areas that I'm happy to do because it's interesting, it gives me diversity, are more the solution focused therapy sometimes, that are shorter in nature. And that's what actually couples therapy ends up being. It's much shorter in nature than individual therapy, although there are some long-term couples that I work with, and that's been a real joy working with them too.
How is couples work different to individual work?
Well, geez, it's so different. Well, I mean, as you know, I'm treating the relationship, not the individuals. And there's a system. There's a lot of energy that's being tossed around. A lot of sometimes arrows thrown at each other, and sometimes thrown at me. And to really step back and sort of notice and keep an eye of what's actually being said, and what, the deeper meaning, what's actually happening, and then to be able to timely intervene with them with both practical interventions and sort of a more long-term sort of roadmap. It's pretty challenging. It's challenging and exciting. It can be really a dynamic session. Whereas, one client, an individual, we might just sit there and completely in silence, or really focus on one minute part of their lives for the entire session. The sessions just tend to go a lot faster in couples therapy. There are a lot of feelings. If you think about it from parts work, there are a lot of exiles that come up, and then firefighters step in, protectors step in. And it's really, from my work, it's disarming or recognizing that an exile has stepped into the room in couples therapy, and learning how to regulate or sort of reduce the protectors attacking each other, so that there can be a sense of connection.
Yeah, there's more protector attacks going on than in an individual session.
Yeah.
And maybe, do you mind just defining protector and exile, just for people who don't know IFS?
Yeah. So in internal family systems, we conceptualize there are different parts to everyone. And it can be, and just parts, to just give a quick metaphor, is we could be driving the bus, and that's a sense of self, but there could be a lot of parts that are passengers in our bus. And so there could be like a really good girl that's sitting there quietly and studying. There could be the rebel like hanging out in the back, and there could be the social parts. And in truth, like, every person has all these different parts. I have, and so different parts sort of working together in the system to protect the self. An exile is generally those are the ones that we really want to put away for safekeeping, and yet they really need our attention. We try to ignore those exiles. Shame is an exile, or the little girl that hasn't been seen and craves love. And when those exiles kind of show up in our system, like, let's just say, I'll give you an example. Let's say, like, I've been calling you, Steve, and like I've been calling you, and you haven't responded to me. You said, I've been so busy. I'm so sorry. What?
No, it's the other way around.
And let's just say it's this way, where I'm calling you and I'm feeling a little rejected, and then I find out that all this time you've been having like all these social parties and barbecues and hikes, these fabulous hikes, and you've been saying that you're busy to me, and I can feel excluded. So an exile can come up in me of like, I'm unlovable, I'm not seen, no one wants to be friends with me. That being an exile that would step in. So there are these protector parts that might try to manage that feeling of I'm unlovable, and so I might just end up, depending on the strength of the protector. So if I'm really feeling stung, so let's just say you're no longer a friend of mine, but you're maybe a romantic interest of mine, and like I like really want to date you, and I feel really stung, I might end up drinking to feel better, right? And that's a firefighter. Or I might dive into workaholism so that I can ignore the feeling of I'm unlovable. Or I might call a lot of my other friends to sort of prove that I'm lovable. So those are protector parts that kind of get in the way of the exiles, because what we want to do is actually treat and talk to the exiles of I'm unlovable, and really speak and listen to that part and witness their burdens. So
the protectors, including the firefighters and managers, right, are protecting some core wounds, some emotional pain.
Yeah.
And then in the couple sessions, you're seeing those protectors go to war against each other.
Right. Where, and, it's, they're going to war, and they're not even recognizing. So suddenly a couple that loves each other can really go from a loving partner to being their worst enemies and entering a boxing ring because they're protecting their own individual emotional pain at all costs, through anger, through defensiveness. It's, another way to look at it is like we have this concept of an open heart versus closed heart. And so connection and real intimacy is allowed when there's an open heart, but the other protectors or defenses can kind of get in the way to close our heart. And it could be just a nice, or armor, but the armor can also be prickly too. It could be throwing daggers. It could be armed with sort of nuclear bombs or grenades to sort of keep the other person out from hurting us. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on in a session more than individual therapy at times.
Yeah, sometimes I feel when I don't do many couples now, but I did in the past, and I would feel like I was in the relationship fight. That you need a certain level of tolerance for conflict, I feel.
Yeah. I think when I first got trained in couples, like I had learned at my practicum site that it was really hard to get in couples track. So I was like, of course I want to try it because I have this high achieving part of me, want to try the toughest things. And when I first walked into my couples, I felt frozen, like this inner child, like suddenly seeing my parents fighting and not really knowing what to do or wanting to solve the fight for them. So it takes a lot of practice. One of the things I'm really enjoying, and I feel like internal family systems, I'm getting trained in intimacy from the inside out, and sort of it's a couples therapy that's based on IFS. I find that this type of work is great to do intensively. So, as an example, I have been seeing this couple that has been childhood sweethearts. They're in their late 40s. They're always about to kill each other, and they've run through 4 couples therapists and then came to me. The last couples therapist fired them, and I realized soon enough, like there's so much protection that was happening between the two of them that their fights would escalate become very heated, and then it'd be directed towards me. And since I've shifted to seeing them twice a week, it's really gotten us some progress so that there can be some trust to let them speak for their exile parts. It's been kind of an incredible experience, actually.
Interesting. Yeah. So more contact, more safety, and then you can get below the protective layers.
Yeah. Because if you can imagine, like if there's just once a week therapy, there's enough exiles come out, protectors come out, and then the next week, the exile kind of learns like they might be more in danger and the protectors might become more armed. So, it's much harder to do that progress on a once a week basis, I've seen. It's a definite style from my own sort of individual approach, which is really more, I guess, very much inspired by my psychoanalyst, which is very gentle and kind and patient and, creating that holding space, to one where in couples therapy, I'm a lot more interactive. Now, it's actually where I really do, I think, really good work is when couples, there are a couple couples that avoid, if both partners are avoidant, the quiet, sensitive clinician me really does well with that. Or if they're working with highly sensitive people, in couples. But there are some couples that have high conflict and they really need a lot of intervention and disruption to keep themselves regulated. I've learned. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What are the fights usually about?
The fights are just the small things, but they symbolize a lot, yeah.
I heard every fight is basically one attachment style versus another attachment
style.
Everything is just coming down to core conflict.
Yes. The rest is detail. The rest is detail. It's just content. And so, that's what I love about IFIO. We sort of use the content or the latest argument to sort of discover what parts are activated. And so it's sort of a deeper experience than just looking at attachment. Like avoidant versus anxious or too anxious attachments. Although seeing things from an attachment basis is really helpful, and actually explaining it to couples when they're first starting and they don't understand attachment. That is a really good. I often see a lot of pairings, and I don't know if you see the pairings of like anxious versus avoidant, anxious and avoidant.
Yes, usually the gender is often the same.
Setup.
Huh. And do you find yourself taking a side? Do you find yourself relating?
I mean, I think it's only human. I want to say the good therapist answer to say, no, I'm always looking at the relationship. There are times, there are definite times where I might start thinking one person is is kind of right in this matter than the other. And
is that sometimes the case, that one person actually is right?
I don't know. What's an example? Are you thinking of something?
Like
as an example?
maybe one partner has a substance problem and the other partner is pointing that out.
Yeah.
And it is something that person needs to deal with regardless of what the other patterns are.
Yeah. That's true. I mean, but like I'm thinking of the couple that I'm talking about. The partner does have a substance abuse. There's some other things that are going on in the relationship, but there is a dynamic that the other partner who isn't drinking is perpetuating the substance use. Does that make sense? Like, because
so there's always a pattern.
Yeah, there's a pattern.
Context.
Yeah, there's always context. So I mean, if you think about it psychologically, somebody we see a lot of people who use substance use being paired with people that are very controlling, and that's why Al-Anon came about. Al-Anon is saying that you're just as sick as the alcoholic. You're looking to control something else to take care of some type of internal need. So, yeah. I mean, I think that it's generally helpful to think of the patterns that are happening as a result of what's happening. I think in cases if there's domestic violence or emotional abuse or physical abuse, there clearly is one person, at fault. And that's where I'd probably say, thankfully, I haven't had too many cases of that. And generally, if there's domestic violence, it's like couples therapy is contraindicated. We want them to do individual therapy first because it'd be too activating. Yeah.
I'm curious to come back to the question of fulfillment and if people are getting there. Are you seeing with clients, even other people doing inner work in other places, are you seeing actual lives change, actual scenarios unfold that are different? How much change actually is happening versus talking about things?
That's a really good question. And I think I probably would answer it with the idea that I haven't had my clients long enough. Because if I come from the belief that it takes 9 or 10 years, which is the case for me, to see true change and sort of fulfillment, I haven't been seeing my clients for 10 years yet, But I have seen real shifts of people on their way to fulfillment. And I'm thinking about, some of my clients that are in treatment center, the presentations of where they were at, where they were dissociating and in their trauma to now being able to hold down a job and attend group therapy and try to put some meaning into their lives of like, what does a job look like, having a job, living away from his parents. So I have been able to see change, but I don't know if fulfillment is a state of being. I almost feel like it's like a journey. It's not a destination. What do you think?
Interesting. Yeah.
I even wonder, like, what does fulfillment mean to you?
Yeah, to me, it's when you're rolling, you're in movement, and you have what you need, and the journey is nourishing in some way, and you can appreciate it, and you're heading in a direction that feels good, and things are getting better and better over time. And then I think there's a tipping point when you feel like you're on that track.
Yeah.
And then when you feel that, then okay, I'll still be working, but now nothing has to fundamentally change for me to die,
Yeah.
as you were saying, on my deathbed to feel good about things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I like that.
So I'm curious how many people get to that track, and I think it's a particularly hard time in the evolution of humans. I think we live in a time of turmoil
Yeah.
where there's a crisis going on at a cultural level.
Right. Right.
And so that I think it is harder for us to be in psychological health than hunter-gatherers. So.
Right. 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 I would agree. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, I would agree. I would say also, there's just so many distractions in our life. Like there's so many sort of addictions, like entertainment addictions, not like substance, but there's so much choice, whether it be social media, so many diversions that can take us down the path. Like we can travel a lot, we can go on vacation a lot, which would be very nice, but that could be a diversion from finding a state of fulfillment, right? If it's just to travel, so I just think there's so many diversions.
I traveled for 5 years and I had a lot of fun, but I did not find deep meaning from
Really?
it.
Oh, I always just had this fantasy that you did. This is how you came out. You're like my 8 or 9 year journey with a psychoanalyst got me to this point, and your 5-year traveling the world got you to this point. But maybe you were born this way, this sense of depth and understanding.
Interesting. So you feel like you can sense that I had some time to develop somewhere. It's possible.
Yeah.
In my metaphor of the snowball, I talk about snowfall.
Uh-huh.
Before the snowball can form, there needs to be enough potentiation, enough potential energy develops in the system.
Mm-hmm.
And I think being in nature for most of those 5 years, often in a tent, doing exactly what I wanted to every day, reading what I wanted to, having the conversations I wanted to, I think that filled me up in some way.
Yeah.
Even though I didn't have a direction. It felt very directionless. But I think it increased my potential to then find a direction.
Yeah. Well,
But I was in rock climbing campgrounds and living the dirtbag lifestyle, and after some point you look around and you wonder, did I pick the wrong crowd? What is this? Are we in the right here? Is this going well? Or because there's a lot of lowbrow behaviors and conversations in climbing campgrounds.
That's so funny. I guess I always have this, again, I have all these fantasies of what your life was like. It's like you're living this Patagonia life and you're like saving the world, you're being with the world, you're having these esoteric, deep conversations with other climbers. But I guess that's just a fantasy that I had. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we kept a little blog, and I was very reticent on what to write, and as was my partner, and I think we were still very contained in many ways, even though we were allowing ourselves so much geographic range. And then it was coming back, doing psychological work, that I realized, I can express myself more, I can be in more contact with people. I think people were threatening to me. So I think there was some escapism in the travel.
Oh, I see.
I think there was work to be done rather than just living that out.
Where did you do your work then, if I can ask you? Your deep psychological work.
Yeah. So psychedelic journeys, I would say, is one place. And I think you get some insights and some fresh energy, but I don't think you get everything there. I don't think you can. And then grounding that and integrating that into somatic work. So a friend of mine went through a somatic program, and having him as a mentor, like when I was asking, was your psychoanalyst a special kind of person? He feels like a special kind of person. Something about him. And I could see in him aspects of that I wanted in myself. His creativity, his willingness to keep things open. And I was probably a pretty frustrating client.
Were you?
Yeah, I think in my family I have the reputation of being very prickly or defensive when I was younger. And I think my parts wanted to really test and make sure that this was a valid, viable thing we were doing. But he stood up to the test well.
Wow.
And I think that is what you really want. I think someone who you can unleash your full attack,
right,
and have it met.
right. Which is that whatever that internal rage or fury that we have, and I think I really very much like what you said about why your person was so special, and maybe that sense of containment for my analyst, the idea that she could accept that rage or the testing that I did. I'm still kind of a bad tester. Like sometimes I'll be like, oh, I want to go from 4 times a week to 1 time a week, and then 3 times a week and 2 times a week. And, then I eventually go back to going 3 times a week. But she allows for those different types of ways for me to test the frame, and making sure that, the feral cat in me is attended to, and that she doesn't sort of reinforce the frame,
Interesting.
It's really
good. So a flexible frame was helpful to you.
Yeah, which is kind of strange because I'm sort of dealing with that with my own sort of practice. I sort of think that in many ways I don't encourage a flexible frame, but the flexibility that she gave me has kept me in therapy.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in some ways jealous of the quantity of therapy you've received. Mm-hmm. And in my life, I feel like I've had to get a lot out of the few times I've had the space to do inner work, and it often feels like I'm trying to do years of work in several days or at a retreat. Mm-hmm. And when I look around, I see a scarcity of opportunities to work on yourself.
Yeah.
And I'm just really in touch with how few times it's almost like a ship that you only come into port, 1 or 2 times a year, or there aren't that many opportunities for deep nourishment.
No.
And I think that's why I made my career being a therapist, because then I am living in the port. I am constantly able to get there with clients. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think as a recipient, I could never justify the cost. But if I'm earning, then I'm happy. My parts that need to be working and successful, they're happy, and so I can nourish other parts.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I like that. I feel like even though you haven't been as much as therapy, somehow you strike me as somebody. I've always admired your sense of depth and the sense of who you are as a person and what drives you. It feels like even though maybe you haven't felt like you've gone through a lot of therapy, you do kind of come across as somebody that has spent a lot of time. So, maybe you didn't need to go through all the therapy that you think you did.
Interesting. Yeah, I do think there's a lot to be said for living courageously. And bootstrapping yourself and just putting yourself into situations where you're forced to grow. And that is its own developmental path when you do that. Almost like life as therapy.
Yeah. What situations did you put yourself in?
I was doing this podcast, running a group last year, getting an office as soon as I was licensed, just going for it in many different ways. Yeah. I think we share this, that we both believe in skin in the game. We both put ourselves out, right?
Yeah, we really do. It's not, I think what I get so excited when I talk to you about our work together outside of this podcast is because there's a sense of like, there's so much passion that I think I share with you on the business of practice, helping other people. I mean, I think, marrying meaning and also meaning and money, like there's a sense of like, there's really a lot of interesting aspects of it. And of all the things that I get from it, it is constant growth, pushing myself to think of hiring associates and running a group practice instead of an individual practice, taking on training and deciding that I'm going to focus on couples. Like, I think all these things are areas for us to grow. And it's almost like this other doorway into myself opens, and it's kind of a beautiful experience. that I get to, embark upon.
And something in me is just wondering if that can happen in many different kinds of careers, or if that's something very special about therapy, that the meaning and money can be married. What do you think about that? Yeah.
I mean,
if you're a programmer for Apple.
I think meaning has to be dealing with being a type of service or service to others. At least that's what I sort of believe what meaning is. And so certainly I think being a physician, any in the helper industries, I think is possible, like being a physician, education.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that you're willing to define meaning quite specifically. And I think some people try to argue whatever they're doing is meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
And some other people might look at it and say, well, I don't know if I would agree if that's worth doing. I think meaning is ultimately tied to that which promotes life.
Yeah.
You help people, and maybe also dealing with death in the case of a death doula.
Right.
But things that serve the life process, are you helping people eat well? Are you helping people have good shelter? Are you helping people enrich their inner life?
Right.
All of these things they're not arbitrary things. They're the components needed for an organism to live in an environment.
Right, right.
So you can't just just decide what you're doing is meaning. It has to actually be meaningful from the outside in some sense.
I like that. I really like that you expanded it just to helping other people, that it's more like advocating life and dealing with the life process. I really like that definition of meaning, for sure.
Yeah, because then it can include you as well. Right?
Yeah.
It's not just only about the other.
Yeah, yeah. I like that. Yeah. So, I mean, from I guess you answered your own question that there are many other careers and professions that can add to this place,
But yeah, most of those aren't modern careers. If you want to be a cobbler or, I guess a chef could be viable. But, a lot of these are harder career paths.
Yeah.
The most obvious choices are things like lawyer, programmer, consultant, basically making presentations and doing busy work in the middle layers of a corporation.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Where you can't, I heard a stat, 30% of people don't believe that their work adds any value to the world.
Oh, geez. That's awful. I feel like it's such a gift that we're in this profession. I get so excited about, I just sometimes, I think you and I talked about like, why didn't we get into this career earlier? Because it's just, it's so meaningful to me. Even in my longest days, in the course of one day, my clients will be at different places, and there'll be one client that will I'll feel so proud of, like just sort of seeing where they are. So every day, as tough as some of those days are, I find meaning every single day. And I feel like my life is almost like Technicolor now.
Wow, I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Any final words of wisdom or a place you would like people to go to check you out, or anything that you have that we haven't touched on?
No, I think, this was such a lovely time to spend with you and talk about the things that got me really excited. If people are interested in learning more about me or finding me, they can find me at lisachenTherapy.com. And I think that's about it. I guess I'd encourage everyone to find the richness in their inner life and to become their most authentic selves. Because when I was thinking about it during the podcast today, I was thinking about the snowball effect and it was only until I found my sense of who I was in my authentic life that everything started snowballing in my career, in my life. And I think I am on a trajectory that is far more successful than what my business career ended up being. So I think that in order to get that snowball effect, you really need to find who you are and your inward sense of truth, your inner truth.
I'm so happy you highlight that, because I think that it has to start with a sincere intention.
Right.
I'm calling it the first snowflake. Hemingway talked about one true sentence. if he could write down a true sentence, then that would be a good starting point, and he could write from it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, something was touched that was bedrock, that was a place that you could build from.
Yeah. Otherwise,
and it stuck. It stayed there.
It stayed, as opposed to like shifting sand, right? Or shifting things that disappear over time. It's ephemeral. Yeah.
There's a Nietzsche quote. Some say my ideas are shifting sands, but if I have one granite sentence, it is become who you are.
That might be a really great tagline for both of us. Become who you are. Find your way home. You know?
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so that's stayed there, and it's getting stronger and stronger, is my sense.
Yeah, it's getting stronger and stronger, and everything feels so effortless. I mean, on the one hand, it's not so effortless, but I think you and I know that to build our practice to get to this place, there's a lot of hard work and a lot of hours we put into it. But those hours I feel so happily able to give those hours away, because I find so much meaning, and it just feels so effortless to me. And so it is like a snowball, like kind of rolling down its hill or gaining momentum. And I really feel like I found home, like in myself and in this career.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I want to advocate for you. I want people to reach out to you. I do send clients to you.
Yes, you do.
I think you're a great clinician. Mm-hmm. So yeah, keep snowballing, keep doing good work.
Okay, I will. Thanks, Steve.
If you enjoyed this conversation and you want to become more involved, look for Snowball Psychology on Patreon. Our music is Find Your Way Beat by Nana Kwabena.